Morning Year 10. I thought I'd upload another video for you. Today it's going to be on question 4, paper 1 for English language. You can probably hear my washing machine in the background, so I apologise for that. I hope you can actually hear me okay. You'll see on Office 365 that I've uploaded a couple of resources that you'll need to refer to today. It would be a good idea, obviously, if you read them before we get started. So the two main resources that you'll need are this sheet here, which says question 4 evaluative essay, and that's worth 20 marks. So you'll have a blank one of those. And you'll also need the text that is Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone. Okay, and it's got all 4 reading questions at the bottom. But like I say, today we're just going to be looking at question 4. Okay, right, so to get started then, I think it's important that we actually read the question 4. If you just ignore my highlighting for now, certainly within the text, we're just going to look at the question itself. So if you've all got that sheet with you or you've looked at it, the question says, focus this part of your answer on the final part of the text, lines 26 to 40. A student, having read this section of the text, said, the writer has created a clear contrast between Harry and Dudley and makes Dudley seem like a big threat towards Harry. To what extent do you agree? And that's worth 20 marks. Now, I know your teachers have gone through question 4, paper 1 with you at some point this year, but I'm just going to clarify a couple of techniques that you can use, a couple of strategies. So something that I would always suggest you do, and you can actually do this to your resource now, if you've managed to print it off, is I would highlight, if you can see my yellow highlighting, I've highlighted where it says the final part of the text, lines 26 to 40. Now, question 4 on paper 1 will always only ask you about the second part of the text, the latter half of the text. So obviously one of the first strategies that you need to employ is you actually need to box off, as I have done here, the relevant lines, so that when you're actually using quotations, you only quote from the relevant section. The second bit that I've highlighted in yellow from the actual question itself is where it says, to what extent do you agree? Now, again, your teachers probably went through this with you explicitly when they taught you this question. Generally, we and the exam boards advise that you always agree. So you would start your answer with, I agree with the student statement that, and then you'd make reference to the student statement. The reason that we and the exam board suggest that you agree is because the question itself has been designed for you to be able to select information to support that question. So you're a little bit foolish if you completely disagree with that statement. So always start by agreeing. Now, you can get full marks by agreeing with the statement throughout the whole response, the whole essay. However, sometimes you will find that you may possibly be able to challenge part of that statement. Our advice to you would be only challenge the statement if you really have a valid reason to do so. And if you are going to challenge the statement and disagree with it, make sure that you do it towards the end of your response so that the majority of your essay agrees with it, and then perhaps finally you could make one challenge to the statement. Don't think if you're in the top sets that you have to challenge something for you to be able to access the highest marks. You don't have to do that. Only do it if there's a valid reason to. Okay. You'll notice then that it's 20 marks, which I've also highlighted in yellow at the bottom. Again, we advise that you spend 20 minutes writing your response. Something that I'm going to point out and reinforce later to you is that this is an essay-based response. So logic should tell you that this should be the longest response on the reading section of the exam. So questions 1 to 4, so 1 being the list 4 things, 2 being analysis of language, 3 being analysis of structure. All of those questions progressively work through 4, 8 and 8 marks. Logically, a 20-mark response means that you should be writing, roughly double what you wrote for question 3, for example. So please make sure just when you look back through your exam papers that you're actually reflecting the number of marks in the volume that you write. Okay, just one simple strategy. Lots of people are a bit scared of this question because it is an essay, but again, you've got to face up to that fear and get over it, because this could be a make or break question for you. Okay, right, the next couple of things that I've highlighted in the question, if you can see, is I've actually used blue and pink here, and it is an idea to have different coloured highlighters with you. The reason I've used blue and pink is because the student statement that you're given is often split into two parts. So in this statement, we've actually got that the student is claiming that there's a clear contrast between Harry and Dudley. The second part of that student statement is that Dudley seems like a big threat towards Harry. So what I would do with my two highlighters, when I actually come to looking at the text, the relevant section, I would highlight all the quotations that I feel support that there's a clear contrast between the two boys in blue. And then I would highlight all the quotations that I feel support Dudley being a big threat to Harry in pink. And it just makes sure that you have quotations that support both parts of the student statement. So again, just another little strategy that you can employ. That's all I'm going to say about the actual question itself. I'll come back to the text later and talk about what I've highlighted. If you can now look then at the other sheet that you should have, or that you should have looked at, what I've actually done for you is I've bullet pointed some strategies that you can use on this question. Sorry, can't get my words out. So I've actually picked out 6 points. I think you've only got 5 bullet points on the sheet. Some of the things I've already mentioned, but you can write these onto your sheet if you want to. So we've already said then that generally you should always agree with the statement. My second point then, which I've just mentioned, is find quotations that meet both parts of the student statement. Number 3, I would prioritise then quotations that can be used to analyse methods from. So I might be able to find, let's say, 12 quotations in total from that part of the extract that I think support that student statement. However, I'm probably not going to have time to write about all 12 of those quotations in detail. So what I would do is I'd actually look back through my quotations once I've highlighted them and think about which quotations have identifiable methods in them. Now, when we talk about methods, we mean language and structure. So it may be that there's a quotation I've chosen that has a simile in it, which is a language method, and which I can analyse and link back to the student statement. And I'll show you how I do that later. It may be that I've got a quotation that I think shows foreshadowing of what's going to happen in the remainder of the novel or the remainder of the text. So again, that would be a structural method. Now, I have actually put on there as my 4th bullet point, try to refer to language and structure methods. Now, so many of you, from having been taught IQED, which is a brilliant method of analysis for language, so many of you are used to picking out word class or picking out techniques like metaphors. That's great. That addresses language methods. Fewer of you are used to or familiar with picking out structural methods. Now, let me just draw attention to the fact that on this language paper, as I've already said, question 2 is language analysis. Question 3 is analysis of structure. So logically, when the examiners designed this exam, question 4 was supposed to be a combination of those skills. So when you get to question 4, if you find that the only methods you are commenting on are similes, metaphors, verb choices, adverb choices, etc., then you are neglecting the structural methods that the writer has used. Okay, so make sure that on balance you've got roughly analysis of the same number, if you like, of language and structural methods. Hasn't got to be exact, but just roughly. I've also mentioned earlier, make sure, this is my 5th bullet point, make sure this is your longest reading section response. Okay, so just a little bit of logic there. I've also put up here as a 6th bullet point, if you like, that a top tip that we give you is that you should steal ideas or methods from question 3. So hopefully your teachers will have taught you to attempt the questions in the following order: 5, 3, 4, 2, 1. Okay, I'm not going to go through the reasons why, but that's the order that you should attempt the questions in. Now that means that I should be doing question 3 on structure before question 4. Now, the benefit of doing that is that question 3 asks me about the whole text. So I actually will have an understanding of the whole text, which will inform my ability to write an essay well on question 4. Now, question 3 is about structure. Now, some of the things that I went through in the last video with you on structure is how you should always look at the end of a text, particularly, say, the last line. When you look at the end of a text, you can look for things like cliffhangers or foreshadowing, even circular narrative, but less so to a degree. So if I already know that the end of this text leaves us on a cliffhanger by mentioning that Harry's got this scar on his head, although he doesn't know why he's got it, so that's a cliffhanger because it makes us and Harry wonder what the significance of this scar is. Now, what that means is that when I get to question 4, I'll remember that it ends on a cliffhanger, and I may be able to use that in my response to question 4, and I'll talk about how you do that later on. So the better you get at question 3 and your understanding of structure, the more likely you are able to reuse and recycle those ideas on question 4 and make them fit the student statement. Okay? So those are my tips, if you like, for approaching the question. Sorry, my washing machine's obviously on a spin cycle now, so it's getting louder. Okay, so something that is very, very important and you have to know for every question is the mark scheme. Now, the mark scheme for question 2 and 3 is the same, even though the methods vary. Question 4, there are actually now 4 bullet points on the mark scheme. So please make sure that at the top of your response, even if it's in note form, which it should be in time conditions, that you jot down what 4 areas you have got to show in your response, in your essay. So those 4 things are hopefully, obviously, number 1, you have to use judicious quotations in your response. Now, judicious, again, like I mentioned last time, means well chosen. Now, well chosen in this respect would be quotations which support that there's a contrast between Harry and Dudley, and quotations which show Dudley as a threat to Harry. So make sure those quotations are apt and well chosen. The second bullet point on the mark scheme is making reference to the student's statement. So I have to constantly in my response keep going back, like you should in any essay, to the focus of the essay. So you may want to sort of rephrase it slightly so that it's not too repetitive, but every point or every paragraph, if you like, that I make, I should always be linking back to, therefore this supports the idea that there's a contrast being created between Harry and Dudley. Or I could say, therefore this proves that Dudley seems to be a threat to Harry because. Okay, so keep making reference back to that student statement to keep you focused on the task. The third bullet point on the mark scheme is analysis of writers' methods. Now, having marked a lot of these exam papers over the years, this is one of the weakest bullet points on this question. Pupils forget to do it. Now, don't get me wrong, your ability to engage with the question and write an essay is priority, but you do have to make some reference to methods used. Now, that's not always going to be, like I've said earlier, being able to pick out a verb or a simile. It can be showing that there's juxtaposition, which is a key structural method, between the characterisation of Harry and Dudley. So in a minute, we'll look at the fact that Harry, for example, is described as being skinny in the text, and Dudley is described as being fat. Now, easy quotations to pick out, something that shows contrast between them, so it supports the student statement, but also it's a clear structural method, juxtaposition, and writers use that so that you can compare the qualities of one character to the qualities of another. Okay, so it's a good way, and it's used in all your literature texts as well. It's a good way of comparing characters, basically. Okay, so make sure you're analysing the writer's methods. And then finally, another bullet point that pupils forget about in this question is effect on the reader. Now, the whole point of the question, it does say, to what extent do you agree? Now, you are a reader. So if you forget to talk about the reader in this question, you are neglecting that bullet point. So you can talk about different types of readers' responses, as long as you're saying, you know, this might make the reader feel like they're rooting for Harry, and this might make the reader feel that Dudley is a bully and he needs to get his comeuppance later in the text. Okay, so show some kind of awareness of how readers would react, feel, or respond to the text. Okay, so if you can read your essay back, and I know it's a lot to do in 20 minutes, but the more familiar you get with these things, the quicker you get. So if you can read it back and you've addressed all of those 4 bullet points, then you'll be successful on this question. Okay, and remember, you only need to get roughly half marks to get a grade 4 pass. I know lots of you are going for a lot higher than that, which is great, but it's not actually that difficult if you address those areas, and you don't even have to address them thoroughly. But if you address all 4 areas, you should be able to get at least half marks. Okay, so that's just some general strategy. Now I'm just going to show you some things in the text that I've highlighted and some of the things that I might say. Okay, so if you go back to your text, it's quite difficult because I'm trying to look at it and point it out as well at the same time. So as I said earlier, the first thing I would do once I'd highlighted the relevant bits of the student's statement is I'd go back to my text and I'd highlight all the quotes that I thought supported that there's a contrast between the characters and that Dudley is a big threat to Harry. Okay, so just to demonstrate which quotations I've picked. So I've picked here that the table was almost hidden beneath all Dudley's birthday presents. Now, I might not write out the whole quotation when I write that up, but that's a quote that I can make reference to, okay? Now, the reason I've picked that quotation and I've highlighted it in blue is because I think when you then look at the quotation where it says that all Harry had to wear were old clothes of Dudley's, and I've drawn an arrow linking the two, I think that shows contrast between the 2 boys, because Dudley is clearly spoilt, and this is how I'd analyse the quotation. So Dudley's really spoilt, and Harry is obviously disadvantaged in a lot of ways. So that would be the point that I would make. Now, if you think about that, the method that's being used is juxtaposition. Clear contrast between the 2. One's spoilt, one's disadvantaged, okay? So effect on the reader there might be that the reader's being actively encouraged to empathise and sympathise with Harry, because we tend to have this thing where we want the underdog to win in the end. We want them to overcome any challenges that they have. So if you think just about those 2 quotations that I've selected, when I was writing up my essay, I would cover all 4 bullet points, because I would say something along the lines of, I agree that there is a clear contrast between Harry and Dudley, because we are told that Dudley, on his birthday, has a table which was almost hidden beneath all Dudley's birthday presents. This is in direct contrast to Harry, who had to wear old clothes of Dudley's. So you'll see there that I've made reference to the statement and I've quoted. Then I would go on to say, this use of juxtaposition, where the 2 characters are held up as opposites, proves that Dudley is spoilt and Harry is disadvantaged. Therefore, this would encourage readers to immediately sympathise with Harry and want to eventually see him overpower or overcome some of these challenges in his life. Perhaps some readers may also want to see Dudley fall flat on his face later in the text. So hopefully you can see then that I've covered all 4 bullet points, and the way that I did that was actually engaging with parts of the statement that the student made and then picking relevant quotations and thinking about what methods were used there. So some of the other things that I've highlighted in blue, just to show you the contrast between the 2 characters, is, I mentioned it earlier, it says that Dudley was very fat and hated exercise. And then again, I've linked that up to a quotation further down that says, Harry didn't look it, but he was very fast. Now, don't get me wrong, being fast doesn't necessarily mean that you're slim, but it suggests it. And then further down, we are actually told that Harry had always been small and skinny. So yet again, you've got quotations, judicious quotations, which support that there's a contrast between the 2 boys, but you've also got a clear method, the juxtaposition, a huge method, okay? So you could talk about that again and the effect on the reader, that again, we want the underdog to overcome a rival who seems to be superior, at least in physical strength, if you like. Okay. Other things then that I've highlighted in blue simply reinforce what we've already said about the physical differences. So when you're looking at a bully and their victim, generally we tend to think of a bully as being bigger than their victim. So again, we've got quotations like Harry had a thin face and knobbly knees, etc. Some other methods linked to the blue quotations, the contrast between the 2, that you could pick out are things like hyperbole. So when it does say that the table was almost hidden beneath all Dudley's presents, and it also says, in fact, I'll come back to that later, sorry. So yeah, when we're told that the table was almost hidden, you could argue, even though that could be factual, that that's hyperbole. And that use of hyperbole, that deliberate over-exaggeration, simply reinforces that Dudley is clearly spoilt compared to Harry, who is underprivileged and mistreated and abused, in fact. So the methods we've spoken about so far are hyperbole and juxtaposition. Now, hyperbole is a language method, but please note that we've not mentioned yet any similes, metaphors, verbs, etc. So I'm just trying to point out to you that methods don't always have to be the ones that perhaps you fall back on normally. Right, let's have a look then at the pink quotations that I've picked. So the pink quotations are the ones that I felt supported that Dudley was a big threat to Harry. So I picked out here, Dudley's favourite punching bag was Harry. So I think we can all see that that clearly shows that Dudley picks on, he bullies Harry. Now hopefully you can all see there that calling Harry a punching bag is a metaphor. So again, if you were writing up a paragraph, and I'm only doing, you do it in more detail in the exam, but I would say something along the lines of, I also agree that Dudley seems to be a big threat towards Harry because we are told that Dudley's favourite punching bag was Harry. The use of a metaphor here to describe Harry as a punching bag suggests that Dudley takes out all of his aggression on Harry, who he sees as some kind of inanimate object who doesn't have feelings. So you'll see there that I've analysed the metaphor. Then I would go to the reader and I would say, this further reinforces the reader's sympathy for Harry, because we can see that not only is he being mistreated financially, he's also being physically mistreated. Okay, so again, now we've covered, if you think about it, juxtaposition, hyperbole, metaphor. So we've got language and structure. The other quotation that I highlighted in pink to show that Dudley's a threat to Harry is that Dudley was about 4 times bigger than Harry was. Now, again, when you're looking at methods, obviously it supports that Dudley's a threat, because someone that's 4 times as big as you is going to be a physical threat to you. But when you're looking at methods, again, I think you could probably quite clearly say that this is hyperbole. It's unlikely that 2 boys of a similar age, that one of them's actually 4 times as big as the other one. So it seems to be deliberate over-exaggeration, which again has been used by the writer simply to increase your dislike for Dudley and increase your sympathy and empathy for Harry. So again, all these points are reinforcing one another, which is basically what you have to do in an essay. You have to constantly build your argument, and that's what you'd be doing by using these apt quotations, these judicious quotations. What you'll notice then is that I've actually highlighted another section of the text towards the end, or a couple of sections, in yellow. Now, the reason I've done these in yellow is because earlier on I mentioned how sometimes you can actually challenge the student statement. Now, in a text like this, where it says that Dudley is a clear threat to Harry, actually, if you look subtly towards the end, we're told that Harry has a very thin scar on his forehead that was shaped like a bolt of lightning. Now, having that scar seems to make Harry unique, and it seems to be significant in some way. Not only that, but it's also a simile, so I could analyse that simile. Now, if something is being compared to a bolt of lightning, it seems to suggest that they've been struck by some kind of electricity. Now, electricity is linked to power. So again, is it suggesting the use of that simile that Harry has some kind of power within him that hasn't yet been realised, it hasn't been released? So what I could say towards the end of my essay, however, to show that I'm going to challenge the statement with a valid argument, however, Dudley may seem like a physical threat to Harry because he's bigger than him. However, Harry seems to have some kind of hidden power that's suggested by that simile that describes the scar on his forehead. Okay, so you could challenge the statement and go into some detail about that. You could then also talk about how he's asked his Aunt Petunia how he had got it. It says the first question he could ever remember was asking his Aunt Petunia how he had got it. Okay, now again, this is where question 3 comes in handy. Because on question 3, if I've done it well, I should have looked at the last line of the text. And I should have realised that that's a bit of a cliffhanger, because Harry wants to know why he's got the scar and where it's come from. Aunt Petunia's clearly never answered the question for him. So we and Harry want to know why he's got that scar. Now, we wouldn't be told that he had a scar unless it was significant. So do you see, it's a cliffhanger because it deliberately keeps us in suspense as to why he's got that scar and what its importance is. Now, that foreshadows that in the future we will find out what the significance of that scar is. So I've just mentioned 2 other structural methods. If I was translating that into my essay to support the student's statement, I might say, however, although Dudley seems like a big threat towards Harry, we know that Harry possesses a unique scar. I'd analyse the simile, etc. And then I would say, the fact that Harry doesn't know where the scar has come from is a cliffhanger, not only for him, but for the readers too, because it foreshadows that later in the text we may find out the origin of that scar and what it signifies, what it symbolises. Then I might say, perhaps this scar will give Harry some kind of power to take on bullies like Dudley, who seem to be physically superior to him. Thinking about readers, I would say, therefore, this may make readers excited because they are anticipating some kind of showdown between Dudley and Harry, where Harry actually gets the upper hand. So I know that's quite a long explanation. What I would suggest you do now, after you've highlighted the things that I've highlighted on the sheets, after you've filled in the strategy sheet, I would actually have a go at writing a response to that question. So make sure you, at the moment, I would perhaps focus on the quality of the response rather than doing it within 20 minutes, because you might find that hard. You'll build up to that gradually. I would aim for, pupils always ask me, how much should I write? I don't really like answering that question, but realistically, you know, it needs to be, in most people's handwriting, a side and a half, really, at least. But make sure, even if you want to highlight the 4 bullet points of the mark scheme in different colours, make sure that in your essay you have covered all 4 of those criteria on the mark scheme. Okay? So have a go at writing an essay for that, and feel free to email it to your English teacher. I will also upload onto Office 365 another text with another question 4, where obviously I haven't given you any guidance as to some of the quotations that you could write about. Okay, so I hope some of you have managed to get to the end of this video, and at least I've sort of filled the screen this time. Don't know if that's a good or a bad thing, but have a go at it. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you soon.